see this thing happening, you're like, well, how is this? And then if you mention like, and people act like, I don't know. It's almost like you feel like you're being just gaslit.
Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air.
All right, so Theo Von did an interview on his podcast with this CIA guy. This is the guy who was going super viral on TikTok with like the weird edits of him talking, because he essentially was just doing podcast appearances and talks where he was discussing his experience in the CIA. He ended up being a whistleblower in 2007 for the CIA torture program that happened after 9/11, and went to jail for a couple years. And so on the other end of that, he has been prominent. He was doing TED Talks for a little bit and that sort of thing, and then recently has blown up in like the podcast space. So, the ultimate question with a guy like this is, what is his motive? What's he lying about? What's he telling the truth about? That's always going to be the most interesting thing to consider with a dude like this. And Theo Von also, of course, shows in this interview why he is not a professional interviewer. So in this first part, he's talking about how he initially got recruited to the CIA. So this is a great example of the type of stories that he tells. Very crazy, lots of wild characters and tension and suspense. But there's a very interesting detail about this story. I want to see if you can pick up what it is. So here is John Kiriakou talking to Theo Von about how he got recruited to the CIA.
When I joined, I was in graduate school at George Washington University, and I was taking a class called The Psychology of Leadership. And the class was about why foreign leaders make the decisions that they make. So I'm in this class, and the professor, Dr. Gerald Post, eminent psychiatrist, tells us to shadow our bosses for a week, just watch our bosses, spend each day with them, and then do a psychological profile on our bosses.
And this is when you're at George Washington University, you're a student.
Right.
Okay.
I was in grad school.
Got it.
There's Jerry. And what a great man he was. He died of COVID, the poor guy.
Oh.
So
he was murdered.
Right.
Carry on.
I'm working at the United Food and Commercial Workers Union at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked for this guy who was a mean, like angry, old school union organizer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was a little bit afraid of him, to tell you the truth. Big, strong, mean guy. And halfway through the week, we got into an argument, and I called him a racist, which he was.
Yeah.
And he got so mad, he set a stance and he put up his fist like this. And I put up my hands thinking, dang it, I went too far this time. And he goes, my penis is bigger than yours. And I said, what? And he goes, my penis is bigger than yours. I said, you know what? You're nuts. And I quit. And I walked out. So I went back and I banged out my paper. I said he was a sociopath with psychopathic and possibly violent tendencies. And I footnoted the whole thing. It wasn't just John venting on it.
But with a possibly decent wiener on it.
You're right, apparently.
You got to put that
apparently. And so I get the paper back a week later. Dr. Post gave me an A, and then in the margin he wrote, please see me after class. So I go up to him. I said, Dr. Post, you wanted to see me? He says, come to my office. This classroom was like on the 6th floor and the office was on the 4th. So I went down there. He closed the door and he says, look, I'm not really a professor here. I'm a CIA officer undercover as a professor here. I'm looking for people who would fit into the CIA's culture. I think you would fit in.
No way.
Would you like to join the CIA? And I said, oh, yes.
Yeah, so again, very colorful story here. And this story about his boss, about how he almost pulled back and hit him, and then at the last minute said this weird thing about his penis. This is a good example of not only the type of fun and exciting story he tells, but the fact that he is this very manipulative figure within these stories. He's telling elaborate stories about the ways he's kind of manipulated his way through the system, and this was before he was even a CIA agent, supposedly. So assuming all that's true, the interesting detail that he mentions here is that this first boss that he's talking about was a union boss, and he's talking about how this guy's racist, and that was apparently what he said to this guy that got him in a fight with him, is calling him a racist. Now look, union bosses were often racist back in the day for sure, so that's not out of the realm of possibility. It's just an interesting detail that even before he was recruited as a spy, this like little test case that he was doing, he was infiltrating a union and accusing a union boss of being a racist and getting in a fight with him. It's just a very particular story. But he then says that this teacher that he was working for, was actually in the CIA and recruited him because of his performance on that test. Now, he also says that they've changed the way they do the recruiting, supposedly, and now it's just, you go to the website or whatever. However, he is not somebody who, is making a bunch of excuses for the current state of the CIA and saying well, we used to do terrible stuff, but we don't do that anymore. That's not his narrative at all. So we'll get more into his narrative about the CIA later, but here is another quick example of the type of conversation that they had, where Theo Von brings up Ro Khanna because he's discussing the provision in the upcoming defense bill that would potentially merge the US and Israeli militaries, something that was snuck in there as a way for them to share technology, etc. And John Kiriakou compliments Ro Khanna and then immediately pivots to somebody else. So here's that.
My friend Ro Khanna actually is putting together.
Wow.
He's trying to put together a bill, I think, to challenge this. I'm not
good.
And I don't know if the term is a bill. I'm not sure. So, I'm more of an emotional guy than I am.
I like and respect Ro Khanna. I hope he runs for president.
He's a neat guy. We had him on here, and it was cool. I think he's a really interesting guy. I think he's brave. I like the stuff that he's brave enough to do.
See, and I say the same thing about Tucker Carlson. I think Tucker. I'll tell you something about Tucker. Is the Tucker that you see on the screen? That's Tucker in real life.
I agree.
He's the sweetest guy. He means exactly what he says. He doesn't hold anything back.
Yeah, of course, Tucker
Totally
Carlson.
honest.
Tucker Carlson has family ties in the CIA, and he also does the foreword to this guy's book about all the CIA tactics, all the things they're up to every day that they don't want you to know. That's just written and published in a mainstream book and promoted on a podcast to millions of people. Okay. But in this next part, Theo talks about this thing he's been going through lately where he's kind of spiraling about everything that's going on, feeling psyopped by, the fact that he voted for Trump and supported him, and now he's gone on to do all these terrible things. And then Joe Rogan kind of telling him it was all about his meds and that he needs to, calm down and stop being so crazy. So he kind of seems like he stops just short of referencing that specifically. So here's that.
You see these things that are wrong or that are and then you see this thing happening, you're like, well, how is this? And then if you mention and people act like, I don't know, it's almost like you feel like you're being just gaslit, and then your media won't cover a lot of it.
That's right.
So I don't know what's going. I don't know, and I don't know what's going on.
I was on the Piers Morgan show not too long ago. I go on every couple of months.
Yeah, so just another example there. Yeah, I was on the Piers Morgan show, and all of the people that he has high compliments for, this Kiriakou guy, are right-winger types. I think he's talked with some more left-leaning guys as well. I don't think he's fully partisan like that, but he sure has a lot of compliments for Theo Von. He starts this podcast by saying, "I'm a big fan of you, Theo Von." And it's all these guys, the Peter Thiels and the Mark Andreessens and, anybody in this weird CIA space, they all just seem so enthusiastic about this podcast network that these guys have built. It's an interesting commonality. And so on that note, I want to get into a longer clip here where Theo Von again brings up his idea of this psyop that he thinks is happening. And this is important to emphasize because Kiriakou goes, at first he gives a good answer, but you can see the distraction tactic that he uses to get off of this subject. But also you can see the fundamental problem with a guy like Theo Von and giving him too much credit in his shifting worldview, because you can see a little bit of the underlying worldview. So while it's good that he's questioning it, there's a lot of more things that need to be questioned about this worldview before someone like this can get to a point where they're really grasping what's going on a little better. So here's that.
So it's just why it's like we just went there and got involved in this. I don't know if this is a taxpayer thing.
God, I hope not.
But just the whole thing is I don't know. You start to feel so defeated sometimes.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth?
And you start to feel like your vote isn't going to do anything. That's the scary part. And then part of this feels like a long-term psyop. It's a slow weakening of the values. Okay, let's put things in this society over time that'll tear apart the American family and that'll poison people. And do you think they're there's big psyops like that going on. Like, let's put COVID out there so that people are separate from each other, and that people can't go to meetings and meet up, and so you start to deteriorate the value of human connection. And let's make food so that it's just poisoning people, and that it's that it's just gonna it's gonna make people sicker. Let's make healthcare so there's no real way besides extreme stress that you have to go through if you even have to make a claim. Like, do you think that some of that is just corporate greed and stuff, or do you think some of that's a longer term psyop by like bigger powers out there?
I don't think it's a part of a bigger psyop.
Okay.
But I do believe firmly that it's mostly corporate greed. You just reminded me of something I saw recently. And it was this experiment that, I don't know, somebody did. I saw it on YouTube, where they put a homemade hamburger on the ground, and they put a McDonald's quarter pounder on the ground, and then they photographed it, over the course of days and then weeks and then months. Bugs come, ants come, they go to the hamburger, they tear the bun down. Mostly they went for the meat, but they end up, a week later, it's just a spot on the sidewalk. Even bugs won't touch a McDonald's hamburger. And then months later, it looks like it just came out of the package.
Yeah.
And Europeans can't understand how we eat like that.
Yeah.
Like their laws are different. McDonald's can't do that in European countries.
Yeah, let's look at the ingredients right here. The difference between McDonald's Europe and McDonald's.
So it's just interesting here, Theo, asking this guy about long-term psyops, right? Like, do you feel like there could be some kind of long-term psyop going on? And while Theo goes into a bunch of things that I do not think would be considered psyops, like COVID happening, I do not think was a psyop. I think that is people going too far and misunderstanding how these things work. COVID is better understood as a disaster that occurred because of origins we don't still understand. It's likely that there was lying about the origins of that. But at the end of the day, it was a disaster that occurred that governments had questionable responses to. That is the more sane way to view COVID. I think, frankly, that the mistake our government made in America was being unprepared for the pandemic, making it much worse than it needed to be, exacerbating the problem, exacerbating the misinformation, when ultimately, if we had just gone by the playbook that was prepared for something like that, we probably could have handled it a lot better and wouldn't have been driven as insane by it. But a lot of these right-wingers have this idea that it was something that was perpetrated on them. COVID was a way that they were robbed on purpose, and that's a very noxious worldview. So Kiriakou does a good thing by going to, no, I think it's corporate greed. And Theo Von, to be fair, is the one who said that initially. So he has that as the counter answer in his mind. And I think that that's true. It is corporate greed. But he pivots to this weird metaphor, this visual that he says he saw on YouTube about a regular burger rotting versus a McDonald's burger. And the McDonald's burger, the bugs won't even touch it, which I don't know if that's even true. I mean, I've heard that with it like biodegrading or whatever. I don't know. The point he's making is that you can sell shit in America that you can't sell to people in Europe. And that's a better explanation for the rotting of the American fabric than, they're trying to psyop you and separate you from your family, which is what the conservatives are going to come to. So the problem here is that Theo Von will never arrive at the conclusion that solves the problems that he is driving himself crazy about, which is essentially this naked imperialism, right? They're doing this imperialism, they're not hiding it, and Trump is openly saying this is about expanding the business interests of America. And so unless you're going to tie your critique of the world to a sense of anti-capitalism focused on reducing the amount of our tax dollar military budget that's going to these imperial projects, putting that into other things, that's going to unwind American empire and make it so that we have more money to spend on programs that lift the floor for people in America. Unless that's what you're talking about, you're only giving these billionaires more room to tear apart the social fabric. That's what they've been doing under Trump. That's the psyop, is that you believed that the billionaire from the billionaire class was going to come in and fix the system without meaningfully opposing capitalism. And that's just not what you're going to get. That's being laid bare by Donald Trump. So it's interesting to me that Kiriakou is focusing on these right-wingers, and the more right-wing messaging And he seems to me like he's the type of guy who could also lean left and articulate a perfectly left-wing critique of the American government, intelligence, etc. But I think that there's a little bit of a red herring in the fact that, you know, somebody who is supposedly exposing the truth about how our government works is doing it explicitly to a right-wing audience, because that right-wing audience is going to do something much different with that information than a left-leaning audience, which you could argue is the actual majority of the country. So here is the last clip of him responding to the allegation that people shouldn't believe him because he's an ex-CIA agent.
How do I know I can believe you about anything, kind of? People ask you that all the time?
Oh, yeah. People ask me all the time.
Because who would believe anybody that's ex-CIA? Who would even, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, that's such a thing with me. You know, generally, I don't read the chats anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody I talk to, at your level, you, Tucker Carlson, you know, Patrick Bet David, Rogan, whomever, they never read the chats. Sometimes I can't help it, and I'll scan them. The only time I ever respond is when people say, once CIA, always CIA.
Yeah.
Like, moron, you thought of all of that all up on your own.
Yeah,
huh?
that's true.
So I said to one guy, I said, you know what, let me call Ed Snowden and the sons of Philip Agee and Ray McGovern and tell them that you think they're all still in the CIA. So I went to prison for telling the truth. And
that's a good point.
I would do it again in a heartbeat. Nobody else has gone to prison for ratting out the CIA and its illegal, you know, programs. I was proud to do it.
That's a good answer.
Thank you.
It's a really good answer. If you, look, here it is, and I can say this. If you really went to jail and everything, then it's a great answer. And if you didn't, I believe you. But also there's a little part of me that's like, if he didn't, then that's fucking even colder that he's making it up and living it. That's the most CIA shit.
That would be pretty intense.
But that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, nobody in the world hates me as much as my ex-wife does. And
from spending all that time in the CIA or in jail? At least jail, you have a good excuse.
It came after, but she came every month with the kids and visited me in jail for 2 years.
Okay, and I'll wrap it up with this. First of all, Snowden is not even allowed to set foot in America anymore. If you were to call Snowden, you would be calling him in a Russian embassy or some shit, wherever he's staying now. He is a fugitive. So the difference between him and this guy is this guy went to jail. Okay, he went to jail for 2 years for exposing some of the most sensitive CIA secrets, some of the worst shit America has ever done. And this guy took the fall for it. He went to jail for 2 years, but that's not really the interesting part of this story. The part where Theo Von should have followed up is, how is it that you are walking around talking about the CIA's most sensitive secrets now? It doesn't necessarily mean that everything he says is a lie and a psyop and blah, blah, blah. What it means is that this is 100% sanctioned speech. If he was running around saying stuff that the CIA didn't want him to say, stuff that was getting in their way at this particular moment, he would be done. There would be no question. We would never hear about him. That's how this would be handled. So it sounds to me from, an outside long view, I haven't watched all this guy's stuff, don't really feel the need to. Maybe I'll cover him more in the future. But it seems to me that this is a guy who, behind the scenes, at the tail end of the Bush administration, after all these programs were wrapping up and it seemed clear that the country was going to go in a different direction, it seems like this guy and some people behind the scenes at the CIA, a group of his buddies or whatever, decided that he was going to do this thing. He was going to be the whistleblower and take the fall. And they said, look, you're going to be the one who does that. You're going to go to jail. We're going to look out for you. And I'm not saying that that was the whole CIA. The entire apparatus of the CIA wanted him to do that. I don't think that. I think there was probably a cohort of them that decided he was going to do this. And on the other end of him going to jail, that is the reason that he is now able to run around and have a career, a lucrative career, putting out the stuff that he wants to put out. I believe that he probably cares about these intelligence standards, etc. But again, there's no way that they would allow him to be saying stuff that was inconvenient for them. So that means that there's some agreement, at very least, at best, there's an agreement, a tacit agreement, probably active, that he's going to reveal certain things and not reveal other things. And, you know, you just can't ignore the fact that his stories are bombastic, they're ridiculous, and, you know, just, it's all entertainment. You know, it's meant to be entertaining. He tells these stories to be entertaining. That's what he does when he distracts Theo Von from this thing about like global psyops. You don't think he had something more interesting to say about global long-term psyops than referencing a McDonald's cheeseburger rotting on the sidewalk? No, he's putting out vivid imagery to try to capture people's imagination and steer the public conversation at least a little bit. And, you know, I have more to say about this, but I'll wrap it up. Maybe I will get back to this guy at some point. But ultimately, there's a reason that, you know, guys like this are utilizing these right-wing softball interviews. And it ain't because they just like Theo Von and his programming so much. It's because they know that they can have a real influence by talking to guys like this and won't get that much pushback.